I hereby call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Councilmember Harris, just so you know, Councilmember Nutting contacted me. He's on his way, but he's fighting traffic to get here, so he'll be late, but he'll just join us. But he said, go ahead and proceed. And with that, the first order of business is the approval of minutes from the 5-2 meeting. Okay, that's done. And then Jeff, we're going to move on to you for the finance update on the CIP process.
Okay, this will be quick. So a couple meetings ago, I updated on the CIP process, and nothing has changed. There's this one piece is kind of I have to walk back a bit. So I showed how online we'd go onto onto the city website and see different projects. Well, it turns out the vendor and myself had our wires crossed. We can do that, but we can do that with 5 projects for free. Anything more would be $10,000 a year. So maybe we put the steps in there or something like that. So I didn't want to raise expectations that something big was going to happen, and then when people see it doesn't happen, not have an explanation. But that's kind of is a cost issue. So we aren't going to be doing it to full scale. So that was just the update, and I just wanted to mention that.
Maybe at the next meeting, you could give us an example or something of what we're going to see. Whatever modified version.
Sure, we can
Just so we see it, But I understand your cost cutting
Yes,
where you can.
and that was the update.
Okay. Any questions, Councilmember Harris, on that subject? All right, let's move on to Parks and Recreation finances.
Thank you. I'll start this off just with a little bit of the backstory here in this memo. So with Parks and Recreation, parks specifically provide, I know what Councilmember Harris loves to hear, an unquantifiable benefit. But every community has parks. Every community should have recreation opportunities. Parks don't always generate money to pay for them, and that's part of what government does. Is government provides parks. That's why parks are public, right? They're not private, because private corporations can't really make money on parks other than like Disney or something like that. So there's always going to be a subsidy in the general fund for parks, and that's something that has existed. It exists in every city. And then really the question of the council that when we're dealing with difficult times is, what should that subsidy look like? What's a reasonable amount of money that the government subsidize these programs, and then at what point is it unreasonable? And at that point you need to look at, what are we providing? Why are we providing it? Can we charge more, or should it just be something that we don't offer? And so that we're, as we're coming into a difficult budget season, we're looking at all departments and tonight's discussion specifically about parks. And I'll just kind of talk about a little bit of background. So pre-COVID, we were operating where, obviously with a subsidy for parks, but it was a subsidy that was reasonable for the city. We go into a global pandemic when everything is shut down. We're not doing after school care. We're not doing, sports. It's, really all this kind of in-person contact is either eliminated or largely reduced. And the city was given federal government stimulus funds to keep employees hired. And that was the purpose of those funds, and they went to public and private organizations so that you didn't have massive layoffs and create, this other negative consequence of a very, difficult time. So during that time, we kept all our staff. We used stimulus funds to do that. We did a lot of programming that didn't cost money, stuff that you could bring your kids to, as far as like a drive-through event, or we had to get creative about what you can do, keep kids occupied, provide activities, provide that quality of life stuff that a community provides. But you really couldn't charge much for it, because it's not, it's not like you're watching someone's kids for a certain amount of time. You know, the parents are involved in all that stuff. So anyway, so that's we went through that for a period of years. And so the subsidy of the parks and rec programs and senior services and facilities greatly increased because that revenue wasn't there. And so as the pandemic has ended, we're really looking at kind of a cultural shift of getting back to where we were pre-pandemic, of a subsidy, but not a significant subsidy. What's the reasonable subsidy? And things have changed, right? So we're looking at, you know, if you provide the exact same programming, if you did everything you did exactly before the pandemic, you know, you have parents that are now working from home. You have parents that have figured out child care sharing things that, you know, maybe the world doesn't look exactly the same as it did pre-COVID. And it doesn't. I mean, that's just the reality, is that, you know, things have changed. Are the exact programs before going to be successful now? Or do we need to look at things differently? And so that's kind of what this conversation is about, is, you know, we are moving back, we're reducing the amount of subsidy that we're providing to Parks and Rec. And Bonnie can talk about that as far as where we were at last year, where we're going this year. And then we need to think about, what are we offering? Could we offer it differently? You know, do we need to charge more? Do we need to offer less? Do we need to offer something else? So that's kind of the conversation of getting us to a point where these programs, which will always be publicly funded to a degree, can bring in enough where the kind of the separation between the expense and the revenue that comes in is a reasonable one, and that helps out with the total general fund. So that's kind of a background of where we're at, and Bonnie's done a lot of work. One, in just working with the department on increasing revenue opportunities, and then also just kind of really diving in deep on what our expenses are, what programs we're offering, which ones are making money. And so I'll just hand it over to Bonnie now.
Thank you, Tim. First, I'd like to introduce some of our wonderful Park and Rec staff. We have Kyle Ellers, our rec manager, and Rachel Sullivan, our assistant recreation manager. So thanks, guys, for being here. I just gave you both, or all three of you, a new handout. What was in the packet didn't actually have year-to-date for 2023 to do a comparison. So I've reworked that, and so what you'll see is total profit and loss for 2023, and that's for the same exact time period as the 2024 figures are. So as you can see, in 2023, for the month through the month of May, recreation was 149 in the whole, but now we're only 60. So that's great. I mean, it's getting better, and I think we can make it even better than that. Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing is met with staff several times, and we're working, like Tim said, on fee structure, what programs are really making it, which ones are no longer. You know, like Tim said, people have found other things to do with their children. So they're really looking outside the box and thinking of what's new and innovative and what people really do want. They're looking at how to charge staff appropriately per program. You'll see a lot of our expenditures are in rec ops, and that's kind of like just the where everything goes. Some staff time prior to 2024 have been charged just in the programs themselves, but most of it was charged into rec operations. So they're working on appropriately charging that staff time to the appropriate programs, and that will give us a better idea of, when we're looking at our programs, what makes sense. You know, what do we need to do? Do we need to raise our fees? Do we need to get more participants? That's always, you know, desired. Do we need to restructure the whole thing altogether? So it's just a great way for us to take a look. I'm thinking this year is a great year for us to change, learn, and grow, and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So hopefully at the end of the year, you know, we don't have that big gap or loss that we had last year. We're going to have a loss, but hopefully we're going to keep it as tight down as we can, and that will help us for our budgeting of 2025 to 2026 to really get an accurate amount of what we need the subsidy from the city to be. Let's see what else. You know, also how can we maximize our field house, which is our community center? You know, maybe it needs to be open 7 days a week. Maybe we need to figure that out. Haven't told them about that yet, but I just thought about it. So what does that look like? We know more drop-in programs, more things for people to do on the weekends. So we're looking at everything. Nothing's off the table, and nothing's going to be left unturned.
Want to talk about, I want to talk about the rentals to some of our charitable organizations. Over the last couple of years, compared to what we would have charged at full rate, what was the loss? What's the average per year that are what we obviously subsidize?
For our events and facilities rentals, we had only about 3 or 4 that we had nonprofits that we could find. You know, staff did a really quick summary for me. There could be more, but for 2023, we subsidized $22,000 in rental. 2022, we subsidized $36,000, and in 2021, we subsidized $2,000. And I don't know that this list is everybody, every nonprofit. This is just what they could grab me off the system.
If we weren't to use these facilities for these purposes, would we be able to rent those out?
Absolutely.
For weddings, like there's waiting lists, no problem?
Absolutely. Part of it is prior to 2023, we didn't have what we're calling the event center buyout. So basically, organizations like, you know, Destination Des Moines, Rotary, the larger ones that use the whole entire facility, and then weddings and things like that. You know, you go down there and you want to rent the meadow and the auditorium, but you kind of don't really want another rental in the Founders Lodge. We would offer you a buyout. So you basically buy the entire property and it's yours for that day. So what we do is offer, prior to 2023, we didn't have that. So the nonprofits would come and rent one facility, but we couldn't rent the rest of it because you can't have Brews and Blues going on and have a wedding in the back auditorium. It just wouldn't work. So they would rent one building and then they would get the whole entire property. So you know, now we have a buyout, which is, it's much desired by people. Some people don't care if you're having a celebration of life and a wedding, but some people do. You know, so it's the renter's prerogative if they want to buy it out or not. But if they do, it's theirs. If they don't, then we will rent the other buildings.
So if I'm renting out and I want the buyout of the whole thing for a Saturday wedding, what's that run me?
Anywhere $8,000 to $10,000, depending on your hours and.
Oh, so if it was full day or from half the day or
Correct.
whatever, okay, 8 to 10K, all right. Cool. Councilmember Harris?
Thank you. Yeah, my only smash hit revenue enhancement is we got to find a way to monetize pickleball at some point.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we have a grant for.
Actually, that was half a joke, but it's really not.
That, no, pickleball is, you know, the state sport, but
I just got people mad at me, but it's just, people loves them, some pickleball.
they do.
My only comment about all of this is that, well, first of all, it's wonderful, but my real comment, me being me, is that I feel that there is room for improvement in segregating the different profit centers. It would be nice if, it looks like we're kind of conflating a little bit activities that happen at the activity center, I'm going to call it DMAC, and some of them are senior stuff, and some of them are other stuff, like the ball fields and everything, and I just think it would be good if we could somehow have separate financials for each purpose, if possible. And I'm not putting that on you. I'm just asking if that's something that's relatively easy to achieve. And if it's not, then forget I asked. But, you know, you hear from parents and stuff about the softball, you know, that aspect of it, and events and stuff. And I get confused thinking about, okay, you know, what of this is actually we do all these lovely day trips, the seniors do, to do different stuff, and I'm like, okay, how do we tease that out from stuff that we do in other contexts?
Well, we can certainly have, yeah, we can have an offline conversation if you want about that, but in the spreadsheet here, I can do separate sheets, but it's broken out like that?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
field?
I just was like, okay, I'm looking at them by building rather than purpose, and it would be better for it may just be me, but I'm just thinking in terms of, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense what I'm asking? Yeah,
Well, that's something I think in the general ledger we can take a look at, because we do have stuff broken out on the general ledger. So just by coding. So if there's something that's in the activity center that maybe not senior services, then maybe we need to break that out with a different code so we can present it separately.
yeah, I just think of these things, these as profit centers or whatever based on purpose. Like this is for the seniors versus this is for kids versus this is for the, okay, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I'd say, take a look at it, but I think for our purposes, I don't necessarily want to go too far down in the weeds. If it's relevant and if it offers something, great, but in general, I thought this was bucketed pretty well. So I have no issue, and I'm excited for the opportunity. It's, we talked about this a while ago about the losses we've continually taken in this department, and it's an accepted loss because, as you've well said, how do you put a price on a park and the use it has and what the greater benefit it brings to people? If 10,000 of our residents visit a park and it's a great family space, that value, how can you quantify it? You can't. But it's a great offering, and that's what all cities do. But the fact is that what a lot of people forget is they cost money, and they're costing more money. And since we have such a difficult financial situation that we're facing, particularly if the levy doesn't pass, what hard choices do we have to make to each department? And so I think you've at least opened a door and you're making the evaluation. You're riding two parallel roads right now. One is if we do pass, this is probably what we'll need to do, because as you guys explained, even if the levy passes, we still need to find cuts. We always do. But if it doesn't pass, then the cuts will have to be sharper, and what goes and where. And to Councilmember Harris's point, if it's making money, we want to keep it. If it's not, we got to really consider it.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, I mean, if this showed that all of these programs made more than they cost, you could just say, you're not gonna find budget cuts here, because if you looked anywhere in here and you're cutting something, you're also cutting the exact same or more revenue, right? When you have stuff that costs more than it makes, I mean, it's just something you always have to look at. And then can we make it revenue neutral? If we can't, can we get it as close to as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's exciting that you're at the helm of this and trying to figure it out, because I've seen your work over the last several years, and I know that what can be done will be done for this department with some tough roads ahead. Councilmember Harris.
I just, question, what is the Port of Seattle interlocal thing which just appeared here? Is that, yeah,
That is on events and facilities, Jeff, and it was last year. I think it was growing up. It was before my takeover.
we can find
Where-
it.
So
And-
it's
That's
right
I think
here. Yeah.
there was some, sorry, it could be related to the food trucks. I think that there was a grant that they split with, that was
Yes,
a,
you're
yeah,
right.
a matching.
Association.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other is, if, to save everybody time, would it be possible for the committee to just get this as a spreadsheet? Then I can just, dink with the numbers as I like, and you guys don't have to do any extra effort.
Yep, I can send you that.
Sweet, that's it.
As long as you don't critique my Excel spreadsheet work. I'm just kidding you. I'm just kidding you. My friends call me a nerd because I'm so into Excel. I'm kidding you. Yeah, I'll send you what I have.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate it. Appreciate your strong work, and do what you can for us.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to the 2023 annual financial statements.
So every May 31st or thereabout, the 150th day of the year, the annual financial statements are due to be filed with the state auditor's office, and we met our deadline, and And so we wanted to just include them in the committee. We report, starting in 2022, we've reported on a cash accounting basis, which in simple terms, it measures when cash goes out the door, when cash comes in the door. So I was just going to just quickly go through this, give a little tour, and share a few highlights. But the first page is what is, it's your statement of activities. So, and what this does, which we didn't before, is you start with beginning cash, and that shows your revenues and expenditures, and then your ending cash. And the first column is a summary column of all the funds. And so you can see our total ending cash and investments was a little over $74 million. And that sounds like a lot, because it is. 25 million of that is, of course, bond proceeds that came in. But you can also notice the categories there: non-spendable, restricted, committed, and assigned. So if you look at unassigned, the last line, you'll see that's the unrestricted cash we have, or unassigned or uncommitted, which is really, of that 74 million, about 1.6 million is actually unassigned, free to use. And you can also notice the column over, that's all in the general fund. So any other fund is considered, that cash is considered assigned for a purpose or restricted by an outside entity. But that's, I think, instructional, because a lot of people hear, oh, you've got $74 million, but they don't realize, there's restrictions and special purposes and, commitments associated with a lot of that cash. So speaking of the general fund, you can see on the next column over that the total ending cash and investments was just a little bit over $2 million. And as I said, about 1.6 of that was unassigned. So that schedule shows all of the funds in the city. Behind that schedule are footnotes. And so I thought I'd hit on a couple of things. I think it's page 17 of the packet. Speaking of the restricted cash, there's a schedule that shows just the amount of restricted cash and then the amount that's committed. So restricted, as I said, is when it's restricted by an outside entity. Citywide, that's nearly $4 million. Committed would be more along the lines of when it's not an outside entity that's restricting the cash, but maybe council has passed an ordinance or something for the use of funds. So council has committed funds or cash for those purposes. And for that, I'm sorry, the restricted amount is 37 million, and then the committed, it would be nearly 4. So it's about, those categories combined is a little over $41 million. On the next page, there's a schedule that shows, it's the footnote is called budget compliance, and this shows that our funds are all in compliance, meaning that they all finished the year under budget. And then the other noteworthy note here that will be a topic going forward, let me get on the page, it's called a prior period adjustment. And so in accounting, even on a cash basis, we want to, there's little areas where you match the transaction with the period. Usually that's an accrual, but there is a little bit of accrual in cash basis. And so I wanted to point out one thing, which is the schedule at the top. In the middle there for about $845,000. There's a payroll expenditure. So what happened was we found,
Just for the record, that's page 25.
yeah, page 25 in the packet, I'm sorry. So we had some adjustments to make. But the second one is one that you'll hear more about as I do the fourth quarter report to council next week. We missed putting a payroll into 2022. So every year should have 24 payrolls. 2022 had 23, and then as a result, 2023 had 25 payrolls. And so we're moving that first January 5th payroll back into 2022, essentially. So that, which is good news for 2023. It also explains why salary expense from 2022 to 23 had that large increase. But I'll be bringing that up to council when I do.
What was the percentage that contributed to the increase in '23 from 2022, just out of curiosity? Do you happen to have that, or can we get it later?
I would say that, I don't have the percentage, but there's this piece, and then there's, in the fourth quarter report, there's also the retro payment to the police guild, which is really a 2022 expense. So if you put those things in 2022, then the salary expenditures increase from 22 to 23 at 7%,
Oh, at 7%, okay.
instead of a much higher. I mean, it's a big swing.
There was some numbers being communicated out that were
Right.
much higher, but that would explain a large part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So those are really the highlights. Our audit is expected to probably start later this year, in the fall. I did want to mention that Eric Mandelis, our financial operations manager, was in charge of this project this year. It was his first time, and he just did an excellent job. He's very thorough, and especially technically on all the rules that had to go into putting this together, so.
So quick question with the audit. This kind of adjustment doesn't equate to some kind of finding or anything, does it?
No, only if you do it when you're not supposed to, which is what happened last year. But this time, we have exactly what it is, it's appropriate, and, yeah, it should not be an issue. And it's a typical accounting thing to do.
Have they identified the areas that they're gonna be targeting in the audit yet to you guys, or?
No, they haven't really, they won't talk to us probably till August,
Okay.
September, so.
Okay. Councilmember Harris, do you have any questions?
Two quickies. First of all, is this, the report is excellent, and I can tell you it's a good report because it provokes more questions than we have time for, but is this the only report that we are legally bound to provide for this particular task, this fund resources and uses, or is there other stuff that, yeah?
There's other schedules that accompany this as far as what we submit to the state, but that aren't normally included in a hard copy version. So we have a schedule of federal awards we've expended, state grants we've expended, but those, yeah.
And then the other tiny little thing is, like, if you look at the marina on page 11, so the expenses are put in culture and recreation. This is just me being me again, but
Yeah.
Is there any way that we could make that more descriptive of what the marina does, or is that's just what the label is for that GL?
Yeah, that's the label. How this schedule is created is we upload data according to the state's coding into their system, and then it spits this out. So it's really the state that's labeling it as that, and we can't overwrite that.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Is that all you had for this portion?
Yes.
All right, let's move on to the 5-year forecast.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to there. Okay, so there's two forecasts included here by request of the chair from the last meeting. And before we look at the numbers, we just wanted to share the assumptions. And even these assumptions are, things change even after just a week or two. Sales tax revenue growth is assumed to grow 1% in 25 and 26, 2% in 27 and 28, and then 29, 3%. Property tax revenue growth is at 1%. 1% annual decreases in utility taxes for telephone and cable TV. Revenue from Sound Transit to end in 2024. That might not be the case. We might have Sound Transit funds after 2024. I think those are in discussions. So that's an assumption made a few weeks ago after I did check on it. And then, of course, conversations happened after that. Salary and benefits for represented employees to increase annually at 4%, and then for non-represented increase annually at 2% rate. Also, another update to the assumptions, which is also good news, because we've actually had some good news lately. SCORE is going to be, our costs are going to go down the next 2 years. So they were $1 million, a little bit over $1 million this year, going to be about 822,000 the next 2 years.
Why's that?
Because they like me so much. I begged enough. No, what we pay is based on average daily population. So and we're also a part of a pie with every other city, that owner city. So our usage we're trying to manage that so it's not as high. They're doing the opposite in Auburn. So Auburn's using it more, we're using it less. Now the population it's a 3-year average, so our efforts probably won't show up as big, for a while. But Auburn has been using more, so we're getting charged less.
Okay, and so, obviously that average daily population or whatever considered, so do you assume that most likely it'll go up in 3 years? I mean, we're looking at 5 years. Are you planning it like commensurate with what it is, the million, just over 1 million it was? For future years?
Yeah, I would be more optimistic. Let me see how to phrase this. When they settle on, so if they get excess revenue from contracts, that's supposed to be returned to the owner cities. And if I see them do that consistently, then I'd be more optimistic that it would be more in the $800,000 range and not returning to the $1 million range.
Okay, so the next couple of years will be the telltale sign?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, if I could add on that just a little bit, Jeff, I think, SCORE is just like us and like every other city where their costs have increased with inflation,
Yeah.
salaries. They have big time medical costs because they're seeing a lot more complicated inmates. There's a lot of people with health issues and drug issues that require more medical attention. So that just, the costs keep rising. So every city that's involved with SCORE is feeling the burn a little bit. And so there has been, at the executive board level, a push to get these costs under control, increase revenue from contract cities and agencies. And so there has been a push for, increasing how much the state can pay when they're using SCORE. And so there's kind of a, push to increase revenue. And then, like Jeff mentioned, we've been really trying to be conscious of our use of SCORE, and that has kind of brought our numbers down a little bit. And then the final piece is, the bigger cities during COVID, there really was kind of a push for alternative incarceration or just really kind of a standoffishness about officers and whether or not they were going to make an arrest. I think, communities are really kind of pushing back on that now and expecting, more of a law enforcement presence, kind of a pendulum swinging back. And so you're seeing cities like Auburn that have a large police force and a large population, they're kind of really stepping up. And so their numbers that maybe got cut in half during COVID are now coming back to that level. So as they do, you'll see us who use a very small share of that jail, our piece of the pie, even if we were to keep our ADP at the same level, our piece of the pie keeps shrinking because it's being used a lot more. So,
But just to talk levy for a second, one of the purposes is it included funding for SCORE with the additional officers because we did anticipate more arrests, correct?
yeah,
So we have to be ready for that. I think this community expects something similar.
Yeah.
But the levies what allows us to provide what that expectation is.
We are at a point where the cost of SCORE is really almost prohibitive. I mean, when we're talking about, why did we start SCORE in the first place is because we were paying King County almost $1 million a year. And so we created SCORE to own something of our own to reduce our jail costs, and we were down to like $400,000 a year, and now we're back up to $1 million. And so, we just don't have $1 million in a small city to pay to put people in jail. That's just not something, it's what, like 4% of your budget.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's almost 4, maybe even 5.
Yeah. And so, and you're not getting any revenue on that. When you're talking about,
Yeah.
you know, a subsidy, that's, you know, it's 100%
Yes.
subsidized. So, yeah, we need to bring those costs down, or we need to find other sources, like what would be a levy to pay for that, because at the same time, you have to, these are, you know, necessary evils. You have to have this in a community, in order to, you know, maintain safety, so.
But, so with this, will we realize the $175,000 roughly this year,
Next year,
next year? Okay,
and moving forward, hopefully.
all right, because I was looking at what you anticipated our projection for, on the 5-year plan, on the projected 2024 annuals with the 16.67 goal. Looks like we're gonna be falling about just shy of $500,000 short, so we either gotta find cuts or we gotta increase revenue, right? Okay. Councilmember Harris.
And maybe this is outside the scope of this meeting, but is there a way to know, does Auburn use SCORE qualitatively in a different way than we do? In other words, I mean, I remember talking to, you know, the notion that some of the inmates are there primarily for, like, you know, drug offenses or for, you know, diversion. I mean, basically, yeah. Do we put the same type of individuals into SCORE as other cities? I mean, is that, do you understand what I'm asking?
Kind of. I mean, I would say, so we use SCORE exclusively, and I believe Auburn does too. So they would put all their inmates there. But, you know, I believe Auburn is, and I don't know the specifics, but I believe they're back towards their historical numbers. So all cities went down during COVID, and that as everyone came down, we came down as well, but our piece of the pie got larger because other cities had such large cuts. Like if they went from 100 ADP to 50, and we went from 8 to 7, right? And so they're back at their historical numbers, which would hopefully bring our costs back to our historical costs, instead of us seeing more costs because our piece of the pie was larger. I mean, there's lots of dynamics. There could be different prosecutors, different judges. I mean, that, you know, a specific judge can change a lot of things when it comes to how many people end up in jail. I mean, you know, I don't know.
It's just that they had, you know, they do have a significant drug treatment kind of a thing, and I'm just, you know, if you say that we're trying to, you know, reduce the number of inmates, you know, our portion of it, and they're, you know, going back to historical, it suggests perhaps a different emphasis in, you know, the consequences of the arrest. So that's.
I would just to clarify, I think we're trying to manage our use of the jail better, and that relates mostly to who you're holding on bail and for what reason. If it's a nonviolent offense and we can have someone come back to a court date rather than hold them in jail possibly longer than they would serve on the crime, that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to do rather than just to hold people. So we're just trying to actively manage that and just make sure we know why the people that are in there, why they're in there, right? And that we have a basis for it. So that's what we've really been more focused on. And we can do that because we have a small number of people in SCORE at a time, so.
So you're on these two spreadsheets, the 5-year plans, one with the levy and one without.
Right. One other note is the beginning fund balance projected for 2024 is going to be a bit higher than that. The final number is a bit over 4.4 million. So that helps. But the one, as you notice, the one with no property tax levy lid lift at current staffing levels at the end of 2025, the change in fund balance would be a loss of about $2.6 million, a little over that, leaving an ending fund balance of 1.3 million, with fund balance going negative beginning in 2026. The other forecast is with the property tax levy lid lift and all the changes that would accompany that as far as additional staff that would be funding. The 2025 would have an ending fund balance on this forecast of about $2.9 million. And the purpose of the levy lid lift is not to plug the entire, budget gap. So there are still challenges, but the fund balance wouldn't go negative on the forecast until 2027.
But what you're saying is, with the levy, it's doable to make adjustments and reductions that are reasonable, and keep that, reserve
Yes.
at the targeted 16.67, where the hill is, there's a hill, but it's not nearly as steep.
Exactly.
Well, and I would say that's probably an optimistic way to look at it. I think both of these hills are steep.
Yeah.
One is steeper than the other. And one's maybe like not even a hill, but a mountain.
One's a
And-
hill, one's a mountain.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at this, like we're about 500,000 short in 2024. So that's not even looking at next year. That's where are we gonna come up with $500,000 before the end of this year, just to get us to have a ending fund balance that meets our, our requirements, right? So
Exactly.
that's stuff that we're working on every day, that Jeff's, constantly looking at, talking to all of us about. So that's 2024. 2025, when people are talking about scrubbing the budget, I mean, we have to do that anyway. Lid lift or no lid lift, because we're still, with the lid lift, we're still 6.5% short, just for 1 year, and then we're, it just kind of compounds every year. So yeah, tough decisions to make where we have to look at everything, even if the lid lift passes. So,
So you just mentioned that the ending fund balance is gonna be about 4.4 million.
Yeah.
So there's about 150 off I calculate to be about 487,000. So that would, cause your number here is 4247.
Right.
So you're saying 4.4, I mean, I understand you still got 300 and something thousand to find this year. That's assuming everything goes as planned, revenues, what you expect to get, et cetera. Obviously, if it's less, then we have a bigger deficit, and if it's more, we close the gap, which would be the sunny, unicorns and kitty cats with bow ties type situation, right?
I was gonna say, take note, you saw me being optimistic.
Yeah,
'Cause you haven't seen that before.
I didn't know how to.
So the 4.413 ending fund balance for 2023, which we'll discuss next week at the council meeting, that's 16.4%, and that's as close as I could get it to be. It's $68,000 short. So I don't know what the ramifications of that is as far as the code goes. But as we look at the financial reports later in this packet, I think that I have some reason to be somewat optimistic that we can tackle this. But Tim is correct that, it's not, there's still, like I said, other challenges, and it is a mountain, and it's, something we take seriously.
So when you're, obviously, as we work through the hiring of a city manager, I assume that your process is to look at each of the departments, you're scrubbing them, you'll have those costs in, you'll be able to translate them over the 5-year plan, and as we see it, we'll get to see the picture. Obviously, in August, we'll know if we have a levy or not, and we wouldn't have to run two sheets, but if we get it, then it'll be easier for you and more straightforward to plan one, but if it doesn't pass, we go to the November, you'll be managing two, approaching the cuts that you've made and what the picture still looks like. That's the game plan?
Yeah, I think how we would approach the budget is I'm gonna just, as I lead the process, I'm gonna budget as if it's not passing in August. Just if it passes, then I can add those items in. 'Cause I can't do two budgets. So if it passes, then I can add those items in, and then we have a budget. If it doesn't pass, well, then I, of course, wouldn't include it. But then if it passes in November, then we can do an amendment possibly early next year, or we can get it in the budget one way or another.
Okay.
yeah, just as far as scheduling goes, we're looking at this stuff every day, but we're scheduling our department director meetings in July. to start the formal process. So it's not something that can wait for a new city manager.
No, I know, and obviously we talked about the timeline expanding, and pretty much it's gonna be your guys' baby. So, well, all of our babies, I might say. But yeah, I like the way the direction you're heading, at least to give it. But I do believe that even if it's low level, giving us a view with and without is important. This was eye-opening that in, 5 years, there's a 30% difference, that, or yeah, 30% difference in the two. It was glaring of the need for what we're trying to take in action right now.
Okay. And then the last page of that section is bridging the budget gap, because it was requested we bring ideas for how to approach the challenges outside of the levy lid lift. So we have a few things. I'd want to stress that these are ideas, not necessarily plans. We haven't really, the budget process just started where, departments are gathering their information, getting it together. No strategies have been implemented at this time. So raising revenue, as we discussed earlier in the meeting, review parks, recreation, and senior services program fees and their revenue structure. Secondly, on the revenue side, we could look at our B&O tax rates. We can look at our business license fees and see how they compare to other cities. Maybe we're charging too small an amount for those things. That could maybe raise a little bit of revenue.
They don't tell me that, so you know.
Oh, okay.
Well, and I'll just say, I mean, these are very preliminary, and these
Yeah.
are just kind of some ideas. But when you get to the point we're at, there's nothing that's good, right? There's nothing that's like, oh, this is easy. There's raising revenue, which a lot of people are not going to be interested in,
Right.
right? Like you said, and then there's reducing expenditures, which by its nature reduces services that the city provides. So, there's
Yeah.
the easy stuff we've already done. I'll just say that.
No, and I thought you had a list of the stuffs within your control. I mean, obviously, one is something that a few of us have been pushing. We don't have the box stores, we don't have the car dealerships, the big ticket items, but exploring or trying to bring in development in our downtown and up on Pack Highway to increase the sales and use revenue. But obviously, we can't tell a business to put themselves here and do the business, but finding ways in the future over the next several years to encourage development, working with them in the permitting process and things like that, I see that as a revenue opportunity. We can't guarantee a number, we can just set the stage. So I don't know, I thought you gave a list of the things you can control. The others are, you can do what you can, but they still need to come. If you build it, they will come, and but until I think a former mayor used to say he didn't get excited until the bulldozer showed, right? And that's the thing, is we move kind of slow, and those are long-term revenue creators, but it shows the need why we need to do it as a city more than ever. But anyway, that was the only one I thought was a miss. Obviously, I shy away from what I can do as far as charging businesses. I think, through COVID and other events, the grants we provided to those, a lot of the business owners, every time I see them thank us because several of them said we saved their business. So, but we gotta do what we gotta do.
There was one item that I had mentioned previously briefly, I think at the last meeting, which was working with a consultant on a long-term financial plan. They got back to us with a quote to work on our, there's two phases. One, to work on our long-term financial forecast, analyze it, and then secondly would be to take that and develop a plan by interviewing council members, directors, and forming a task force with community members. However, the quote came back at $115,000. And so we took the temperature and just saw two heads shake, and so that's probably all the discussion that needs.
At this point, yes. I would agree with you. When we're trying to find $78,000, we don't want to give up 115. That just puts us in that net back
Okay.
to 600.
I was conflicted because like there's an opportunity maybe with ARPA funds, but then seemed like we could maybe find a more economic way, economically responsible way of accomplishing the same thing. So I had no horse in that race really. So
And then are you done? Is that everything?
not for everything, but
That was a 5-year.
Okay. I'll just add that we're gonna be bringing forward, some reallocation of
Of ARPA.
existing ARPA funds. We're gonna be doing that soon.
I think on the 27th.
Of June. That's just really taking the funds that we haven't spent, that were allocated for certain things, and hopefully, with the council's approval, we'd like to use them to cover this $480,000 hole we're looking at,
Yeah,
to
interesting.
some degree. Yeah.
Looking at it, if you got some numbers penciled out, obviously give it to the full council, but the finance committee would love to see it
Yeah.
as soon as possible.
And we have a few projects that weren't fully spent, and so we're thinking that it could be used essentially somewhere else that's needed.
Okay. Moving on to the general fund report.
Okay, so this is the general fund through April. This is one of the times where my message was it's okay to feel good about something. The total operating income was $1.35 million. It's important to remember that April is one of my favorite months because property tax comes in April. So that showed up. So that really boosted that number. It comes in again to the same extent in October. As I mentioned, the beginning fund balance will be a bit higher at about $4.4 million. So even at the lower fund balance, beginning fund balance, we're at 23.5%. So as I mentioned, we'd finished last year at 16.4. The first quarter ended at 19% without property tax, which I think was very encouraging. And then through April, with the help of property tax, of course, being at 23.5%. Other highlights, I'll just go through this real quick because we're going to be talking about sales tax next. So that's the property tax. Red light running is one item that's been catching my eye lately. Let's see where it is on here. But there it is. So it's a little bit, we've been budgeting that at 1.2 million, that's kind of where it plateaued, but it's actually declining and getting closer to 1.1 million. So we probably have to lower our expectations of red light running revenue, which is good because that means fewer people are, running red lights.
And just to clarify, the new cameras down at our new park, the Redondo Boardwalk, they go to which account?
They don't go into the general fund.
Exactly.
They go into their own special revenue fund. Now, there might be pieces in the general fund, like court costs related to those tickets, that can get reimbursed by those funds. So that is another funding source that can help. And then also, sales tax continues to be flat, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth on the next item. And then another encouraging sign is that our operating expenditures are down and under budget by 1.1 million. The two contributors, I think, would be we've had a number of vacancies in the police department, and also it doesn't account for, like, speaking of Parks and Recreation, their expenditures come in the summertime mostly. So, we're not looking at those expenditures either. So there's probably a seasonal factor in there along with vacancies that have us under budget through April.
Yeah, I noticed like the city manager, city clerk, human resources, finance, they kind of washed each other out when you look at the total number versus the total. It's just in different buckets than it was last year, correct?
Yes.
And just so the city attorney, or the city attorney is way low because I'm being paid out of the city manager portion right now. So that's.
Yeah, I just, I wanted to, I just wanted to make that clear. Again, there's been comments that, you know, they're looking at one particular bucket and not another, when you really have to look at the buckets collectively.
Excuse me, Chair, we have about 5 minutes left.
Thank you. All right. Move on to sales tax.
Okay, sales tax, I'll hurry this up, but there was one interesting thing that happened yesterday, and I just took note of it for the committee, is that the finance director of Federal Way sent out a group email to about everybody he knew in the state working as finance directors for cities, asking how their sales tax was doing and mentioning that their REIT was down. So Federal Way sales tax is down 4.6%. And his comment was that their REIT was down a lot. Responses came back. Des Moines, we're down 3.31%, and our REIT is actually up 42%, though 2023 it dropped 31%. So it went down, but it's coming back up. Centralia responded, their sales tax is down 4.1%. Their REIT is down 41%. Kirkland said their sales tax is up 4.7%, though it's a mix of increases and decreases. And also, Kennewick and Woodinville said that their sales tax was flattened out. Kennewick has a 60% of theirs is retail. Woodinville's 33% retail, and their REIT was all down. So the fact that our REIT is up, though it's not in this topic, is encouraging. And what we're experiencing in sales tax is pretty much normal as far as any city in the state. So I thought that was informative. And then the slide that I've included after the schedule, I included it because if you look at our report here for May, we're down $55,000 from this point last year, which is the 3.31%. But it's really what's dragging us down. There's three categories, but primarily construction sales. And so I was at a lunch seminar finance thing last month, and the chief economist for King County did a presentation, and this slide's from her presentation. You can see in King County, construction is, you know, sales growth is down 6%. So what we're experiencing in Des Moines, as far as sales tax is concerned, is not unique to us necessarily. But you can see that the first category in the report is construction sales tax, and we're $120,000 behind where we were this time last year. I expect that to continue because our one-time sales tax, it was based mainly on two projects that are pretty much finished. There's nothing taking their place right now, so I don't even think that's going to be a budget issue this year, is what we do with one-time sales tax funds, because I don't expect there to be much, which is not a positive message, but that's kind of what's going on everywhere. So that's kind of what the sales tax report looks like by category. The other two down were wholesale and I think, where is it? Oh, and retail down a little bit, but not much.
Can I ask a quick question? This is more out of the curiosity. So we have two pot shops in town. Where does their sales tax register in the sheet? I was trying to figure that out.
That is in, let me see.
I saw a couple food, I didn't think it was food and beverage. It could be but there was personal care, health and personal care.
I can get that. I provided that for another city. I just can't remember the code that it's in, but I can get that.
Yeah,
I can email the
it was-
committee
It
that.
was just out of curiosity, because I know it was one of our larger revenue sources as far as sales tax.
Well, and would it be sales tax, Jeff? I
Or
think
is it
there's
a
like,
state
there's a
deal through
different
the-
tax.
That's true. Well, I think we do have some.
I mean,
think
they
it was-
would have some sales
It's
tax.
excise tax, I think.
Yeah.
The extra piece, I
Yeah.
mean, we get quite a bit from those two.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would come in on this chart, the bigger piece.
Okay,
So-
yeah, that's,
That's why you're probably not seeing like
yeah, exactly,
one
so I
kind
was
of
wondering
odd.
about that one in particular, because we'd had the one that did, I think, roughly 12 million a year. Obviously, you get two in the same area, one's gonna drop a little bit, but, you know, since everybody, all the surrounding cities have moratoriums, you'd naturally expect some kind of growth there, so I was wondering what that might be. Anyway, if you can get back to us later, that'd be great. Councilmember Harris, did you have any questions?
No, I just have a quick comment. I'm probably the most optimistic person at this table, and it's basically due to existence of this committee. That sales tax report was extremely helpful, as are all these materials. It's more informative than the council since, in years. And thank you.
Excuse me, Chair. It's now 5 o'clock and
All
the
right,
meeting is adjourned.
we adjourned. Thank you.